making something for the little ones in our life this holiday season, or maybe even the dogs in your life. We're going to be making a little stuffed gingerbread boy. Now, if you're making for little babies or for dogs, I suggest not putting things like buttons on, but otherwise they're really cute. So this little gingerbread boy is pretty easy to make. You just need a few supplies, a little bit of stuffing, and a little bit of hand needlework, okay? So little stuffed toys like this are so fun for the holidays, and there's so many different patterns that you can do, but we're just gonna do this gingerbread boy. Let's get started. Okay, so for today's project, we need just a couple things. You're gonna need your pattern piece, and there's two pattern pieces. There's one that has a 1/4" seam allowance around the outside, so you can use this one if you prefer, but I'm actually going to use the other piece where it has a stitch line and doesn't actually give you the seam allowance. And so for this one, what you need to do is get a piece of your fleece fabric. You need like a thicker fleece fabric for this, and you're actually going to trace your pattern right on this sewing line, and you're not going to cut it out. So as you can see, hopefully you can see my lines are on there. We're actually going to sew just directly on this line. Now you want to make sure when you do this that you leave enough room that you have at least a 1/4" around the edges, because after we sew on this line, we're going to cut around the outside at a 1/4". I cut it pretty close at the feet here, but I think I'll still be okay. So if you want to do it the way I'm doing it here, you're going to need the pattern piece template 1, and you're actually going to trace it and sew right on this line and then cut out the shape. If you are using the other template, template 2, you would cut this out and you would trace this onto your fabric, and then you would actually cut out the shape before you sew. But like I said, I'm going to do template 1, I'm going to trace it on, and I'm going to sew directly on that line, and then I will cut out the shape. So you need a little bit of fleece fabric for that. And then you can use, the pattern says you can use rickrack to make like the little decorations. I'm actually just going to keep them pretty simple, partly because I don't have rickrack and partly because I think he'll be cute, just like a regular little gingerbread boy. And then you can also do little pieces of like red felt, little circles if you want, or I have a couple buttons, so you can have any other little decorations you want for your gingerbread boy. I'm gonna add these 2 little buttons. So you need whatever little decorations you want, and then you need some stuffing. I am just using polyfill. This is just like regular basic polyfill. So I'm going to be using that to stuff him. And then to do the eyes and the mouth, you will need a hand sewing needle and some black embroidery thread. Now they say you can do black embroidery thread for the eyes and red for the mouth, and you certainly can do that if you want. I'm just going to do it all black. However, I don't actually have any black embroidery thread on hand, and so I'm just going to use my regular thread. So if you're in a pinch, just use your regular thread. Now, regular sewing thread is not as thick as an embroidery thread, and so what I did is I just got a really long piece and flipped it over, so I actually have 4 strings all together to make it kind of a thicker thread, so that the eyes, when I stitch them, actually stand out a little bit better. So yes, it would be better to have the actual embroidery thread because it's thicker, so you'll be able to see it better, but I'm using what I have on hand today. And especially if you're a beginner, I kind of suggest the same, at least as a trial one, and if you really like it, then you can go out and get the extra supplies. So we're going to take this over to the sewing machine. We're going to stitch on the line, leaving just a couple inches open in order to turn it. So I will see you at the sewing machine. Okay, so to sew this little gingerbread boy, you are going to stitch right on the line if you're doing it the same template that I am. We are just going to carefully and slowly stitch right on the line, leaving a small gap to be able to turn this right side out. I think I'm going to do my gap maybe on the upper part of his foot. It's fairly straight there, so I don't have to try to flip this out on a curve. So I think that'll be a pretty good place to have my opening. Okay, so I'm going to start near his toe here, and I'm just going to carefully and slowly stitch on the line, making sure to back stitch when I start and stop. Might need to lift your presser foot to be able to see the curves and the lines. Just go nice and slow. You'll see I keep lifting up my presser foot and turning slightly to help pivot it. That just helps turn it. Tight curve there around the head, so just go slow. Coming up to where I'm going to stop, so I'm going to make sure that I back stitch. Okay, so now we have our little guy all stitched out. Now I'm going to carefully use my scissors and cut around him, leaving about 1/4 inch seam allowance. Being very careful not to cut into my. Now, where I left the opening, I'm actually going to leave more of a seam allowance, just so it's easier to turn that down when I go to fold in those sides and close it up. So my line is right here, but I'm actually leaving all this space. It'll just help me when I have to close him up later. Okay, now some of these really tight corners, I'm actually going to take my scissors and just snip in toward the stitching line. Just being very careful not to actually cut my line. These scissors are not as sharp as they should be anymore. Maybe kind of under the armpits. Anywhere where there's like a sharp turn. Definitely in the little crotch area there. Okay. If you want, you can also use some pinking shears and go around the toes and things if you want him to be more precise. I'm not too worried about it for this project, so I'm just gonna call it good. So over here is where I've left the extra seam allowance, and now we're going to very carefully turn him right side out. So through that hole, this will take some finagling. I'm gonna start with his head and his little arms. If you have a chopstick or a pencil handy, or some kind of tool like that, now would be a good time to grab that, because that can help you with all the little parts that are hard to turn. So I'm just going to use this little turning tool here and just stick it in there to try to push out his arms and his legs and all the different appendages that are so small that it's hard to. I'm just kind of running this along the edges as well to help try to like round out his head. So you can use it to poke the corners and things, but you can also run it along the edges to try to poke those out and get those nice and flat also. Just be careful not to poke a hole through. Okay, there's my little guy. He's looking pretty good. Now I'm going to take my stuffing and stuff him. Starting with his head, you're going to take a little bit of stuffing and you're going to get it his head nice and full, and then his arms nice and full, and then down to his legs, and then lastly fill up his body. Okay, so now we're going to do the face features, and I'm actually just going to use my marking pen and just put the eyes kind of where I want them to be, just so I have a good idea where I want my eyes to be. Then you're going to take your hand stitching needle and your thread, and you're going to go inside through the hole because you don't want the knot showing on the outside. And you're going to take this and go right up to where you marked and have your needle come out right out at that eye spot. Okay. Okay, I lost my camera, not sure what happened. I'm going to go back in that same eye here once I think I've got it good enough. And I'm going to point my needle towards the other eye, and I'm going to come out where the other eye is. So it's just hiding that thread in between there, but now I can make the other eye. And again, I'm going to go down and kind of pick up some fabric here, just doing a little bit of crisscrossing with my fabric, going in and out, picking up fabric, not going straight down and straight back out, just kind of at an angle where I'm picking up a quarter, like a centimeter or two of fabric maybe in between there. Okay, and then when I think it looks just about good enough, I'm going to go back down through the eye, and I'm going to come out lower where I want the mouth to be. So now I'm going back through the eye and coming out near the mouth. And for the mouth, I'm coming out and then I'm going back in a little ways away, picking up a little bit more fabric, coming out, and then I'm going to go backwards back. So I have a spot here where you can see a thread, and then there's a gap, so I'm just going to take my thread and go backwards to fill in that gap, go in and come back out another like quarter inch or so. Okay, and then go backwards to fill in that gap, come back out another quarter inch up ahead, and this will probably be my last one. So I'm going to go backwards, and then I'm going to try to get my needle to come out in the exact same hole that thread just came out of. Whoops, lost my needle and thread there. Let's try this again. Again, I'm not doing any fancy stitches here. You can see all kinds of great tutorials online for more fancy stitches if you really want to do a nice, perfect smile or face. But for me, this is perfect. Now, I'm going to take my needle and my thread, and I'm going to go back down into one of these spots where I've already had thread, and I'm going to poke straight through, and I'm actually going to go straight through all the way back outside of his head. Let's see, can you see that? Okay, and I'm just going to pull this tight. Took my needle off. I'm going to pull this really, really tight, and I'm just going to snip right near there, and what that does is yanks the thread back into his head so you can't see it anymore. So now I have a little smiley, and now I need to sew on my buttons. So I'm going to go get some more thread to sew on my button details. Okay, so same thing when you sew on your buttons. You want to go in through the hole and come out approximately where you want the button to be. And you're just going to thread your button on. Again, I'm not making this a major tutorial of how to sew a button. If you are unsure how to sew a button, then I'm sure you can find lots of tutorials about just sewing on buttons. But you want to go up and down a couple times, sew your button on, There's one button. I'm going to go underneath that button and come out a little bit lower on him to get the other one. Coming up through the buttonhole. You might find it's easier to do these things before you stuff him, so you can certainly sew the buttons on and do the face before you stuff him also. Okay, lost my thread again. Alright, so I'm going to go last time here, come up, and now when I go back down, I'm going to go into the button, and I'm actually just going to pop right out his back. Okay, and I'm going to pull tight so I have some tension. I'm going to snip that thread, and that way it's just hidden inside there. And you can't see the thread anymore, but his buttons are stuck. Now what we need to do is go back in with a ladder stitch and close this up, okay? So for this you want darker thread that matches your fabric. I'm just going to use the color I have already because I just already have it for here to show you. Okay, so you want to knot the end of your fabric, and you want to go in through the hole and come out at the edge of where your hole is, okay? And then you want to push this knot inside. Then you want to go directly across from where you came out, put your needle in, and on that same side come out about 1/4 of an inch or so, 1/8 an inch to 1/4 of an inch, and pull. Then you want to go straight across that line, put your needle in again on the opposite side, and then have it come out on that same side, about 1/4 inch down. Pull it out, okay? And you can see these rungs kind of in a rung of a ladder, and if you pull, they get hidden. Now, when you use the right color thread that matches, it'll be hidden even more, but there you go. I have another video on my channel showing how to do a ladder stitch, where I show you in more detail and closer up. So if you're having a hard time with doing a ladder stitch, check out that video. But you just want to finish stitching that ladder stitch closed, and there you have it. Your little guy is done. And there you have it. There is our finished little gingerbread boy. Isn't he cute? Now, go make some for your dogs and the babies in your life. Again, though, if you have babies, don't put on the plastic parts or pieces that could come off. Same for dogs. But these would be great little stocking stuffers for the little ones in your life. Or you could even make one for, instead of elf on the shelf, you could do gingerbread on the shelf and hide him around and do a little game with the gingerbread boy. Gingerbread boy's trying to get away from me. Can't catch me, I'm the gingerbread man. All right, until next time, happy sewing.